All right. So let's finish up this lecture or the food contaminants of concern and move on to extraneous matter. Extraneous matter is really short, so we should be able to finish on time. I just want to say don't worry too much about quiz 3. It didn't go so well. It seems like many of you did not really, seems like studied the protein separation lecture for some reason. But in any case, it's just equivalent to any lab report, and there are many lab reports, so you can make up the grade if it is low for you. Okay, so don't worry too much about it. I will post the key if I didn't post it already. Make sure to look at that to see the answers, just the knowledge of them. Okay, just recap. What are the different categories of residues and contaminants of concerns? Some of you need some extra points. All right. Allergens is a category. Very good. Pesticides. Claire? Drug residues. Evan? Huh? You like that. Somebody mentioned it last time. Was it you who mentioned? Okay. What else? Okay, Taylor? Tyler? Huh? Taylor. Why did I say Tyler? Where's Tyler? Tyler is right there. Okay. Say that again. Mycotoxins, Jillian. Yeah, we said that drugs, antibiotics. Also, there are so many different chemicals that could wind up in the food. Either they can be formed during processing, like acrylamide, for example, or furans, or benzene, or chemicals that are added as adulterations, like melamine, or other chemicals used for preservative, like sulfite. Yes, Daniel? Yeah, GMOs is a category of its own. Well, GMOs, we can detect their presence by looking at protein content, protein types that could be genetically modified. Yeah. So how they may get into food, we talked about that. Name quantitative and qualitative methods. What are some of the very common methods that we talked about last time? We listed them like several times. Yeah? We used a lot of GC, a lot of LC coupled with MS. Most of the methods are really coupled with MS, given that we need low detection levels. I see a hand up. Was there a hand up? Yes? Immunoassays are used quite a bit for the analysis of several of them. Mycotoxins, allergens, pesticides, antibiotics. A lot of the assays are immunoassays. Okay, I'm going to highlight this again. If you don't study anything, but you study this table, it's good. I guarantee you there's going to be a question on this on the final. How else can I make this table more important? Okay, so please study this table. It summarizes quite a bit of different contaminants and residues of concerns. Of course, it does not include pesticides and allergens. You need to know these, and mycotoxins. But these are the other ones that could be present. And then how did they wind up in the food? Why is it of concern? What type of food they might be found in, and then major methods of analysis. Okay? So we talked last time about acrylamide, and now I'm going to just briefly introduce bisphenol A, which is found in plastic and might leach into water or beverages. The health concerns mainly for infants and young children. It might cause diabetes or heart problems. It is typically banned or allowed in a very low limit. And again, methods GCMS, LCMS, oftentimes tandem MS, and immunoassays. Another packaging-related chemical is the methylbenzophenone, which is a metabolite of benzophenone. And it is a component of ink. There has been an issue with cereal boxes, with the ink on the boxes leaching into the cereal. And then the health concern is long-term risk to children in terms of liver and kidney failure. But if it's consumed in a very small amount for a short period of time, it shouldn't have a health impact. But it's still kind of debatable whether or not it can be tolerated or can be tolerated in the cereals if it leached into the cereal or any type of product. But you can notice that nowadays when you buy a cereal box, usually there is another like a bag that contains the cereal, and that's an extra precaution so that ink from the outer package does not leach into your product. Furans, they are often produced with high heat processing. They potentially were present for many years in products, but they were not really discovered until recently. And they are carcinogens. That's why they are of concern. And they could be volatile, so headspace GCMS is the method for analysis. Acrylamide, I said earlier we talked about acrylamide last time, we talked about melamine last time, now not acrylamide. But we mentioned it briefly. Acrylamide is formed in food during processing, especially high carbohydrate food in the presence of protein, and specifically the amino acid asparagine will react with a carbonyl group to give you acrylamide. Oftentimes in foods that are cooked at high temperature, like deep fried food, for example. So asparagine is the main, is the amino acid involved in the formation of acrylamide. So this is something to remember. Carbonyl group reacting with asparagine. Methods of detection, LC and GCMS. Benzene is produced in beverages when we have ascorbic acid and benzoate salt. So upon pasteurization of these beverages, benzene can be formed, and it is a carcinogen. And it is volatile, so also a headspace GCMS method can be used. Monochloropropane, this is specifically produced in acid-produced hydrolyzed vegetable protein. So acid hydrolyzed vegetable protein often use HCl. So HCl might react with residual fat in the sample, and that will produce monochloropropane. And it is a known carcinogen and a suspected genotoxin. So because it is a suspected genotoxin, it really shouldn't be present at any level in the product. But there is a limit of 0.01 to 1 ppm. But if it is confirmed as a genotoxin, it shouldn't be present. Perchlorate, it is industrial contaminant, a component of rocket fuel that might make its way into the soil and from there into water. And it was found in a variety of food such as bottled water, milk, and lettuce. It can lead to hypothyroidism, and method of detection is ion chromatography and tandem MS. Okay, so other than the major categories, which are pesticides, mycotoxins, allergen, and antibiotics, do study that table. Again, I'm going to put it up. There it is. Okay. And it is also summarized, the same table, you'll find it in the textbook. I'm not sure which chapter now that is with the new edition, but you should be able to find it. Okay. So moving on to the very last topic for this course. We're going to end it at a disgusting note. Sorry to say that, extraneous matter. They're disgusting. But it was a pleasure teaching you. Okay. So analysis of extraneous matter. So extraneous matter, that means anything foreign that could wind up in the food, and that can come from insects, insect spores, for example, or whole insects sometimes, rodent hair, excreta, bird, parts of the bird feather or excreta, and then stones, sand, dirt, metal, glass. All of these are considered extraneous matter. Well, insects can be food, right now. And the capstone, the two groups, worked on insect proteins. Yet, they are still categorized as extraneous matter if they're present in your food, unwantedly. So they can get into your food right from on the land, before harvest, during storage, during transport, and during processing. So at any stage, you can get insects in the food, and it's really very hard, super impossible not to have contamination of insects in your food. So we are eating insects, whether we like it or not, certain level. So on the land and the farm before harvest, you have several types of insects that would infest your grains or the crop, and when they're harvested, they are harvested with them. So you might get whole insects or you might get parts of the insects. During storage, not only insects can make their way, but also rodents. So rodents can find their way to grain storage, for example, or other types of crops stored, and that would lead to hair from the rodents as well as urine and pellets. Thus there are regulations, so that we cannot avoid their presence, but there are limitations to how much of that can be allowable in food. So the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act stated that food is adulterated if it contains filth, putrid, or decomposed matter above defect action level. So there is a defect action level for different types of food, because really, like I said, it's very, very hard not to have any filth or extraneous matter in your sample or food or ingredient. But good manufacturing practices limit how much they wind up in the food. So through thorough inspection of raw material. So if you did a project, for example, and let's say one of your ingredients was flour, something that you really have to check as quality in the flour is the content of extraneous matter. For example, it is allowable to have 75 insect fragments and 1 rodent hair per 50 grams of flour. So 50 grams of flour, you are consuming about 75 insect fragments and at least 1 rodent hair. So think about it as proteins. So it's really good for you. So, In peanut butter, it's allowed to have 30 insect fragments and 1 rodent hair per 100 grams of peanut butter. And that comes from the peanuts that we harvest from the farm. So these are the defect action levels. So there are these levels are set by FDA for different crops, different ingredients, and different food products. So here's just cartoon for you to Luther investigates the sudden increase in rodent hair content in peanut butter. So, and then here, hold it, this one has only 7% insect parts. So they make cartoons of it, but it is real. You're eating insects. Okay, terminology. So you'll hear different terminologies for extraneous matter. So filth is commonly referred to as animal contamination or other objectionable matter. Heavy filth and light filth. So this is depending on their density. So heavy filth is sand, soil, insect and rodent excreta pellets, and these can be separated by sedimentation, so that they sediment to the bottom and you separate them, and they're called heavy filth. Light filth is the opposite. They are particles that are oleophilic. That means they are soluble with the oil or the lipid component, and they're separated by floating because they're light, low density. So small insects, insect fragments, rodent hair, feather barbules. So these are all light filth. And then there's the sieved filth. This is termed as sieved filth because they can be separated based on size using sieves of different mesh number. Okay. So there are several concerns for methods of analysis. First of all, subjectivity, because we're counting insect parts, and if somebody's doing it without a lot of experience, might miscount some fragments or not recognize them as insect fragments. So training and experience is required. Some fragments of insects are really distinguishable, like the mandibles. Others are hard to decide whether or not they are insect parts, such as fragments of the insect cuticle, the outer layer of the insect. There is a lot of transfers in some of the methods, transferring from a separatory funnel onto a filter paper, for example, from one container to the other. That transfer, you might lose some of the fragments and you miscount. Also, the defect action level is based on counts versus size. So a whole insect and a fragment of a cuticle is considered one part. So that is potentially a concern. So I'll give you a few examples of methods. So this is an AOAC and AACCI method for forming matter in spices and condiments. Since they are in powdered form, you basically filter them through sieves with a 20 mesh size, and then you take whatever left on the mesh and look at them under the microscope so that you can distinguish the filth and count it under the microscope. That's pretty easy and straightforward. Now let's say you have nuts. Do you de-shell the nuts and defat the nuts using petroleum ether, chloroform, and carbon tetrachloride? And then what happens is the defatted nut will float to the top, and then heavy filth will sediment. So you take the sediment and you filter that using ashless filter paper. It's supposed to be ashless because you can also put it in a muffle furnace and incinerate at 500 degrees C and weigh. So if it's ashless filter paper, so the ash content will be directly related to your filth, to your heavy filth. Or you can filter and just count the sand and soil under microscope.
Yeah.
Hmm? Yeah.
Why does it matter like what the weight is if it's by like amount? Like at least it's not by weight, it's by the number of pieces. Like why?
Well, in this case, this is the heavy filth that would be like any soil and little pebbles and stuff. It's not the insect. So the insects part are really the light filth. And this is the method for insect fragments and rodent hair. And this method is specific for rye flour. And what it is based on is you digest with an acid, so you break down the different components to release the filth from the matrix. You use alcohol and tween. Tween and EDTA are mainly used if you have bran, so to make the bran heavy and not allow it to float with your insect parts and rodent hair. And the heptane is your organic nonpolar phase. So in this procedure, we use what is known as Wildman trap flask. So in this, you have a flask, an Erlenmeyer flask, and you have a stopper with a long tube attached to it. So your sample aqueous phase will be in the lower part, obviously, due to density, and then the oil layer and all of the light filth will be at the top. So the way to separate them is, of course, certain quantity is added of the oil versus aqueous, so that when you pull that tube out, and that stopper is going to go up to here, so you will have the oil layer separated from your aqueous. So you take that oil layer, you filter it, and then you look under the microscope and count. Okay. Another method is the flotation method, and this is done for looking at the filth, light filth again, pre and post milling of the flour. Again, this is involving digestion and adding of mineral oil, paraffin in this case. So here you use a separatory funnel, so you have your aqueous solution with the digested starch or components of the flour are digested and remain in the aqueous phase, and then you have your organic phase or the oil phase where your light filth will be in, and then you separate the two phases, filter and wash with detergent, then count under the microscope again. Well, your grains can be infested. And you know, your FDA allows 32 grains infested per 100 grams of wheat. So again, your bread and pasta and all wheat stuff, you are really getting a good portion of insects per day. So when somebody gives you a product like the Capstone Group formulated with insect protein, don't say, ooh, I don't eat insects. You are eating insects. Well, I'm one that said ooh and I didn't eat the insect. But anyway, we are eating the insects, and one way of looking at the infestation in wheat is by doing X-ray radiology and then counting the wheat. You can see the larva here visibly inside of the infested wheat. While X-ray radiology is used to count those infested, it's not really an official method. An official method for the presence of insect and bird excreta is measuring uric acid from the urine, and then measuring protein myosa, insect protein myosa, with using immunoassay. or NIR to detect later stage in internal insect infestation of wheat. Microscopy is often used to look at different metal types. If you have metal or glass contamination, so you can look at different metal types using SEM, or you can use light microscopy to differentiate glass from plastic from other crystalline contaminants. And here's the X-ray. So preventative measures, so to prevent the presence of high amount of filth in your final product, you can, if you have, let's say, wheat, what you can do is you can scan by X-ray to determine how many kernels are infested per 100 grams of wheat. You can do aspiration, so you can run your grain on a belt that has pores and then run air through, and then they will, the light filth will obviously float, and your grains will remain on the belt. Air floating, this is for if you have heavy filth. So your small grains, you can float the grains, and then the stones and the excreta pellets will remain on the belt, whereas your small grains will be floating. Wheat, you can break open the wheat by crushing it a little bit and then use aspiration, because if you have more than 32 insect damaged kernels per 100 grams of wheat, you want to try to leverage the wheat. You can reduce the insect contamination by just breaking that wheat, aspiration, and then reduce that amount of insects present in your flour after that. Magnets are often used to, if you have any metals, so they can use magnets to remove metal from the product or the ingredient. That's it. Look at that. We're done. What should we do? Zach? We don't have recap questions. Do you have a question, Riley? Daniel? Nobody wants to stay longer? It's just so sad to just leave. You have a test? Okay, I'll leave. But thank you. It was a pleasure knowing you and teaching you, although you were a very quiet group. But good. I will post all of the grades. I'm still finishing up the last couple of lab reports. So hopefully you'll have an idea where you stand before the final. So watch out for Canvas, and I'll update everything material you need for the final on Canvas. Any questions for the final? It's on Saturday, which is a bummer. But we meet here. Any questions? Yes, Ted?
So you said that the main focus is going to be discussed since the
Last midterm, but any tool like chromatography, spectroscopy, mass spectrometry, you really need to know that. Sample preparation, you really need to know that. Okay, that's it. Goodbye.